Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me at the Taubman Museum of Art. I'm in the exhibition A Very Anxious Feeling, Voices of Unrest in the American Experience, looking at this particular work of art by Eduardo Sarabia. While it may appear to be created using spray paint, can you believe that this work of art is actually woven? And in fact, in this next series of videos, you're going to see some various weaving techniques to show you how to create your own weaving. We hope that you enjoy this next series of videos, and we'll see you next time.
Stick loom weaving is a fun and approachable way to try weaving when you don't have a loom. All of the materials are pretty easy to find, including a Y-shaped stick. You'll just need to find one around your neighborhood and then be sure that the branches that make up the Y are pretty even and not too bendy. You'll also need some just regular run-of-the-mill yarn, some scissors. Tapestry needles are great, and then the key thing is that you use a kind of twine that you can use baker's twine if you like. It's also called warp thread, which you can find on Amazon or at Michael's. To start creating your loom, you will tie a knot with your warping thread at the bottom of one side of the Y-shaped branch. look and see if there is a knot in the wood maybe, or an edge that you can kind of fit the thread into. This will help keep it secure. When you knot it, be sure to leave the hanging thread on the outside. You can use your thumb to hold it down. Then you're going to stretch the thread across the Y, and you're going to wrap it around twice. So be sure every time you take the thread to the other side of the Y that you do wrap it around 2 times. Don't pull it too tight, but it should be taut. If you are pulling it tight enough to actually squeeze the Y shape together, this is going to cause you problems later on when we add the yarn. So just be sure that it's taut across the Y, but it's not pulling the wood. You might need to do this a couple times. Your branches might shed some bark, or if your branches are really long, it might just take a little bit to stretch the yarn all the way across. Keep doing this until you've wrapped your twine up the entirety of your Y-shaped branches. If, like the one in the video, has one longer branch than the other side, then you'll obviously want to stop at the highest point of your shortest branch. Then you are just going to tie off a knot and make sure that everything is pretty even, that you have a relatively even space between each of the warp lines. And be sure that any thread hanging off the end of your knot is out of your way. Now you'll need your yarn. While you can do this with just your fingers, it can make it a little easier to use a tapestry needle. And this can be, any kind of blunt, larger needle. They're usually a couple of inches long, and they have a wider eye to easily put your yarn through. Those will make it just a little bit easier when you get towards the tighter spaces in your Y branch, and particularly near the end, but you don't need these. The great thing about fiber is that you can push everything apart with your fingers. Next, we're going to start the weave, and we're just going to do a really simple over-under weave. I recommend starting from just the middle of the top of your warped thread. So just somewhere really simple. Don't worry about it being too close to either branch. We just start right in the center and we'll be able to pull it across. So just simple over under. The width of your warp thread will be a little bit different depending on how wide your branches are. If you have a really thick branch, your holes between the warp threads is going to be pretty big, which in some cases will make it easier to actually weave through, and in other cases might make it a little bit more challenging. But just start with a simple over under right down the center from the top to the bottom. After you've done the first line of over under weaving, just pull the thread completely across so you've got a little bit of a tail on the open end, and the majority of your thread in the needle, or just wherever you're using as the part you're weaving, is all the way near the Y. Pull the thread straight and then just a little bit across towards one side, and then what you're going to do is come back up doing the same over under right next to it. As you do this, you might just want to, double check that the thread that you're putting over is next to that first threading, which should have gone under the warp thread. So just hold it up next to each other. When you pull it all the way, you'll notice that it's going to create a little bit of a divot near your warp thread at the bottom of the Y. And so be sure that you don't pull too tight. You might want to actually use your fingers to kind of stretch that back out. Once you've reached all the way to the other side again with that same over-under motion, you're just going to do it again. Go right back down the other way. You might need to use your fingers to push the warp thread down, depending on, again, how wide your branches are. If you accidentally miss one of the warp threads, you go over when you should have gone under when you should have gone over, it's an easy fix. Either it's going to unthread the whole thing just by nature of the fact that you went the wrong way when you get all the way to the end, or you just pull it out. It's very easy to fix any of these errors. So if you miss one, which can often happen, particularly if you're working with a really wide branch, no worries. Just take your tapestry needle out if you're using one, and just pull the last bit that you did just straight out the back. So now you'll just continue to do that over and under next to the already threaded yarn for as many lines as you'd like. I'd say let's make maybe 4 to 5 initial threads, and you might need to redo them a couple times, no big deal. Right now, for the beginning, it's probably a good idea to try to keep most of your threading just right down the center. Don't worry too much about trying to match it all up or squunch it down too much. After you've gotten a few lines through, again, trying to keep it straight but not super tight, then you can use your fingers to push the yarn all the way up the sides of your stick loom so that they rest against the end of your stick. Then you can start on a new color. One important note about all of the ends of your yarn. So at this point, you're just going to leave them kind of hanging out either end wherever you finish, and just cut them so that there's maybe only an inch or two sitting loosely, and just leave them. So now we're going to figure out what to do with the tight V-shaped bottom of your loom. In a regular loom, you could do this over and under all the way across because most looms are square. But since we've got a narrow end and a wide one, you do have to figure out what to do with that at some point. So there are lots of different options, and one simple one is that once we get down to the narrow end, you'll keep going with your yarn until basically there's no room left. And depending on how thick your yarn is, whether you're using a tapestry needle or just your fingers, basically if you can get into that spot is going to determine where you'll stop. Once you reach the lowest thread that you can reach, you'll turn around and go back and just do your regular threading. But if you are unable to reach the same one that you had for all of the other ones so far, then what you're going to do is actually just go to the next one. So if you have done, let's say there are 8 warp threads in your whole loom line, and you've run out of room to create a straight across line with your yarn at the narrow end, then what you're going to do, instead of going all the way down to the 8th loom thread, you're going to go to the 7th, and you're going to turn around and come right back. And then when you reach it again, you'll go to the 6th. And then when you come back down again, it'll be the 5th, and so on. And so you'll end up with this nice graduated sort of staircase section. When you have created this new shape on your loom and you come back up with a new color and a fresh piece of yarn, you'll have to incorporate it into your weaving. If you don't do that, if you ignore those pieces of yarn and you just keep going across as normal, then what'll happen is you're going to create these 2 separate shapes, and they'll separate on the loom and it'll be awkward. So what you do is, you start your threading not on a plain line of loom like you usually would, but actually on the warp thread just on the inside of the last loop. So here with the yellow yarn, you can see the last loop that was done on each warp thread. I'm just going right next to it on the inside, and I'm creating a nice little knot so that it's incorporating all of my shapes into the weaving. This is going to be like a little awkward at first because you don't have a lot of room to work with. When you're in these tiny tight spaces that are created by the V shape, it's going to look really strange when you first get started, but as you add more and more thread and more yarn, it will look more natural and will fill up and make more sense. So we're starting on the other end with this one. We're starting on the little narrow side, so you don't have a ton of space to work with. So you just have to trust that you're gonna make sense of it. And as you keep going, it will create a nice incorporated clean shape. Use your fingers to keep pushing the yarn over so that you can create enough room for you to add the new yarn. And just keep going over, under, in the tighter spaces, just do the best that you can. And in the wider spaces, just stay with what you've been doing. And then you can do that to completion. You can add in more colors, but this is the essential back and forth. You just do the over, under, over, under. You keep all of your tail ends loose, like I mentioned, until you have covered your entire loom. So now we're going to finish off the weaving by tucking all of these tail ends of the yarn into the back. So at this point, both sides should look the same, and you're going to have to choose which is your back end and which is your front. Might be best to see the way that the stick is laying when you put it down. If there's one side that has like a big knot on it or it's a little heavier, it's probably going to end up always being the top. So choose that way. So what we're going to do is, whichever side is your back, you're going to take that tail end, and in its same color, you're going to just thread it on the back end through the yarn that it's the same piece from, on the pieces that have gone over the warp thread. So you're just going to take it and just push them through so that they're sitting kind of on top of the warp thread under its own color, so you can't tell at all. And then you're just going to trim it right at the edge. If you've put it through several lines of yarn, it actually will stay. It'll be pretty sturdy at this point. You don't need to knot it. You don't need to do anything fancy. This is where having a tapestry needle is actually really helpful, just because you're trying to fit it through so many little tight spaces, but you can absolutely use your fingers. Again, it's fiber. So the great thing is you can pull it apart, make a hole, and then push it back together, and everything's fine. So the general rule of thumb is just to remember which side is your back and which side is your front, because as you do this all the way through, you will have some little pieces kind of tucked in, sticking out. So you want to make sure that they're hidden away from view. You can do this quite neatly, or you can be a little haphazard about it. Just as long as everything is relatively flat, shouldn't make a difference. After you finish tucking in all your tails, your weaving is complete and ready to be admired.